Verstappen thought it was nothing, a perfect race, no mistakes, no warnings. But hours later, the FIA found something no one saw, and confirmed a penalty that proves even a millimeter can change everything. One tire. One white line. 5 seconds added after the race. And here's why this is terrifying for Red Bull. This wasn't called live. This came from new evidence, new angles, a deeper investigation after everything was already finished. Which means one thing. The race doesn't end at the checkered flag anymore. 9 penalties across the weekend. Zero tolerance. Every detail under review. And if something this small gets punished, then Red Bull might be in a much bigger problem than anyone expected. At first, it didn't look like anything. Verstappen exits the pit lane, accelerates cleanly, merges back onto the track, and continues his race without hesitation. No radio message. No warning. No reaction from the broadcast. Just a normal moment, completely invisible. And that's exactly why this situation is so important. Because during the race, nobody caught it. Not the commentators. Not the fans. Not even the FIA in real time. That tells you how small the detail really was. We're talking about the outer edge of a single tire, barely crossing the solid white line at pit exit. A movement so minimal, you wouldn't notice it unless you were analyzing it frame by frame. And for the entire race, it meant nothing. Verstappen kept pushing, managing a difficult Grand Prix where Red Bull wasn't dominating like before. He was fighting in a tight group, holding position, extracting everything from the car. No signs of trouble. No indication that anything was wrong. But here's where everything starts to change. Because once the race ended, the FIA didn't stop. They went back. They reviewed the footage again, this time with better angles, slower replays, more precise data. And suddenly, what looked invisible became clear. The tire had crossed the line. Not by much. Not aggressively. But enough. And that single word, enough, is what defines everything now. Because in Formula 1, once an advantage is detected, no matter how small, the rule is absolute. There's no margin. There's no interpretation. There's just the line, and whether you crossed it. So the FIA made the call. 5 seconds added to Verstappen's race time. Penalty confirmed. But here's the detail that makes this moment even more unsettling. This decision came after the race was already finished. After the checkered flag. After the result felt final. And that changes the entire perspective. Because it means what you see on track isn't always the final version of reality. There's another layer. A hidden review process that continues even when everything looks done. And for Red Bull, that creates a new kind of problem. Because when a mistake is detected during the race, you can react. You can adjust strategy. You can give positions back. You can recover. But when the decision comes later, there's nothing you can do. No correction. No defense. No second chance. And that's exactly what makes this moment so dangerous. Because it shows that even the smallest, almost invisible detail can come back when it's already too late. And this is where it becomes much bigger than a simple penalty, because what the FIA did here changes how every team has to think. This wasn't an aggressive move. It wasn't a risky overtake. It wasn't even visible in real time. And yet, it was still punished. That sends a very clear message across the entire grid. Nothing is too small anymore. Now think about how Formula 1 usually works. Drivers push limits. Teams calculate risks. There's always a gray area, a space where you operate right on the edge, knowing that sometimes you get close, sometimes you step over, and sometimes it goes unnoticed. But Miami destroyed that idea. This was a weekend filled with penalties. Investigations everywhere, multiple drivers under review, and at least 9 different FIA actions across sessions. That's not random. That's a shift in control. And when enforcement reaches that level, the entire philosophy of racing changes. You're no longer asking how much you can push. You're asking how much you can risk. Now look at Red Bull. This is a team built on precision. On pushing every limit, extracting every bit of performance, operating exactly at that edge where speed meets control. That's how they win. But in a system like this, that edge becomes dangerous. Because when the rules are enforced down to the smallest detail, operating at the limit means you will cross it eventually. Even if it's just by a millimeter. And that's exactly what happened to Verstappen. But here's where it becomes even more uncomfortable. Red Bull is no longer dominating the field. They're fighting. They're in tight battles, surrounded by rivals, where gaps are small and pressure is constant. And in that environment, small penalties stop being harmless. Today, 5 seconds didn't change anything. Tomorrow, it could cost them everything. A podium. A victory. A critical moment in the championship. That's how this kind of system works. It doesn't punish you when you expect it. It punishes you when you can't recover. And that's exactly what makes it dangerous. Because now, every pit exit, every line, every tiny movement becomes a potential risk. Not just in the moment, but later. When better evidence appears. When new angles reveal something you didn't even know you did. And by then, it's already too late. So this isn't just about Verstappen. This is about a new reality in Formula One. A reality where the race continues even after it ends. Where decisions can come later. Where results are never completely safe. And in that reality, even Red Bull is exposed. And this is where the real consequence starts to take shape, because what happened in Miami doesn't just stay as a detail in the report. It becomes a pattern. Because when the FIA proves that even something invisible can be detected later, teams begin to assume something even more uncomfortable. That there are more moments like this. Moments that haven't been seen yet. Moments that could still be reviewed. Moments that could still turn into penalties after everything feels finished. Now imagine that inside Red Bull. Engineers going through data after the race. Drivers replaying every lap in their heads. Asking questions they didn't have to ask before. Did we cross something? Did we miss a detail? Is there anything else the FIA could still be looking at? That's the kind of pressure that doesn't come from the track. It comes from uncertainty. And uncertainty is one of the most dangerous things in Formula One. Because this sport is built on control. Precise inputs. Predictable outcomes. Clear limits. But Miami introduced something different. A gap between what drivers experience in real time. And what the FIA can confirm later with better tools. And that gap is where the danger lives. Because when you're inside the car, everything happens too fast. You rely on instinct. You trust your feeling. You push to the limit based on what you can see, what you can feel, what you believe is acceptable. But the FIA doesn't operate in that moment. They operate after it. With slower replays. With multiple angles. With data you don't have access to while driving. Which means one thing. They will always see more than you can see. And they will always judge with more clarity than you had in the moment. That creates a disconnect. And that disconnect leads to mistakes. Not because drivers are careless, but because the system itself makes perfect judgment in real time almost impossible. And for Red Bull, that's a serious problem. Because their entire strength comes from operating right at that edge, trusting instinct, maximizing every detail. But now, instinct isn't enough. Because instinct can't see what the FIA will see later. So what happens next? Drivers start to adjust. They leave a margin. They avoid getting too close. They sacrifice tiny bits of performance, just to stay safe. And those tiny sacrifices? Add up. Over a race. Over multiple races. Over an entire season. That's how performance slowly fades. Not through one big mistake, but through constant, invisible compromises. And this is where everything connects back to Verstappen. Because even if this penalty didn't change his position, it changes his environment. Next time he exits the pit lane, he won't just drive. He'll think. About the line. About the angle. About the possibility that something invisible could be judged later. And that thought, even if it lasts a fraction of a second, changes everything. Because in Formula One, the difference between instinct and hesitation is the difference between winning and losing. And now we reach the part that truly defines the impact of all this, because this isn't just about Verstappen, and it's not just about Red Bull. It's about what Formula One has become. Because for years, the limit was something drivers could feel. You knew when you were close. You knew when you risked too much. There was a connection between instinct and consequence. But Miami broke that connection. Now, the limit isn't just what you feel on track. It's what the FIA can prove later. And those are two very different things. Because the driver lives in real time. The FIA lives in replay. That's the shift. And once that shift happens, the entire sport changes with it. Now imagine a championship fight decided by moments like this. Not a crash. Not a mechanical failure. Not even a visible mistake. But a detail so small, it only exists when you slow it down. Frame by frame. Angle by angle. That's where results can change now. And that's why this moment matters so much more than 5 seconds. Because it introduces a new kind of risk, one that doesn't announce itself. A hidden risk. The kind that stays invisible until it's too late. And for Red Bull, that's a serious problem. Because they are no longer racing from a position of comfort. They're in fights. Close fights. Where margins are already razor thin. And when margins are that small, you rely on instinct. You rely on confidence. You rely on committing fully to every movement. But now, there's something else in the equation. Doubt. Not loud. Not obvious. But present. Because every time Verstappen approaches a limit, every time he exits the pit lane, every time he pushes that extra fraction, There's a question in the background. Is this still safe? Or will this be judged later, differently? And that question changes behavior. Maybe just a little. Maybe just for a moment. But in Formula One, a moment is everything. That's how you lose a tenth. That's how you lose track position. That's how you lose control of a race. And over time, that's how you lose a championship. So what did the FIA really do in Miami? They didn't just give Verstappen a penalty. They removed the last layer of certainty. They showed that even when everything looks finished, it isn't. They showed that even when a mistake is invisible, it still counts. And most importantly, they showed that in this new version of Formula One, perfection isn't just about what you do on track. It's about what survives the review after it. And this is where everything finally comes together, because the real damage isn't the penalty itself. It's what it proves. Because for the first time, in a very clear way, Miami showed that Formula One is no longer decided only by what happens on track. It's decided by what survives after. Think about that. A driver can execute perfectly in the moment. Hit every apex, defend every position, manage every lap under pressure, and still lose something later. Not because of a visible mistake, but because of a detail so small, it only exists when the race is replayed, analyzed, and judged with tools far beyond what a driver can access in real time. That's the new reality. And that reality changes everything for Red Bull. Because their biggest strength has always been confidence. Absolute confidence. The ability to push without hesitation. To operate at the limit without second guessing. To trust that what they're doing, in the moment, is enough. But now, that certainty is gone. Because now, even when everything feels right, it might still be wrong. And that creates something Red Bull hasn't had to deal with for a long time. Doubt under control. Not panic. Not chaos. But a quiet hesitation that appears in the smallest moments. A fraction earlier on the brakes. A slightly tighter line on pit exit. A decision to leave just a little bit more margin. And those fractions add up. Over a lap. Over a race. Over a season. That's how dominance fades. Not through one big failure, but through hundreds of tiny adjustments that slowly take away performance. And this is where the real consequence of Miami becomes unavoidable. Because this wasn't just about Verstappen crossing a line. It was about the FIA proving that every line matters. Every movement. Every millimeter. Even the ones you can't see. And when that becomes the standard, the entire grid has to change. But not all teams will adapt the same way. Some will play it safe. Some will lose performance. Some will struggle to find that balance between speed and precision. And in that chaos, the team that manages it best wins. So the real question now isn't whether Red Bull can be fast enough. We already know they can. The real question is much more uncomfortable. Can they be perfect enough in a system where perfection is judged after the fact? Because if the answer is no, then what happened in Miami won't be remembered as a small penalty. It will be remembered as the moment everything started to shift. The moment where races stopped ending at the checkered flag, and started being decided long after it.